Welcome to Impact the World, a podcast from West Park Baptist Church in Knoxville, Tennessee. This is where we discuss topics related to how we can all love God, love people, and impact the world. Here's your host, Tara Hayes.
I'm your host, Tara Hayes, and I'm getting to sit down with my, we call him the co-host now at this point, Matthew Goldstine. How are you, Matthew?
I'm great. It's good to be here. How are you doing?
Good, doing well.
Good.
We've entered into a new year.
We're at 2026.
That's weird.
It's crazy.
I feel like we just started 25.
I feel like we just started 2022.
I know. But we're getting ready to head into a new series on Ecclesiastes. And as we like to do, we like to sit down and kind of have a preview of what is to come, kind of why we ended up here, and just to kind of understand where we're headed. So why are we going through Ecclesiastes? I mean, it's not your most typical book, but it's a good way to start a year, I think.
I think so too. And I mean, I always make the joke that we're like behind closed doors using a magic 8-ball or something like that to determine our preaching calendar. Not quite that, but yeah, so starting on January 4th, we'll have an 11-week Ecclesiastes series. We'll have 2 weeks that kind of cut into that in the middle for missions conference, but 11 sermons on Ecclesiastes that'll take us right up to Easter. And before I give kind of an explanation on why Ecclesiastes in particular, just as like a helpful reminder for the big picture of what we're doing with our preaching calendar and preaching ministry, our whole structure is that we're trying to do a regular, steady diet of expositional preaching, meaning that we're just trying to go through the Bible and making the point of the sermon be the point of a particular passage. And so we do that by going through large sections of Scripture, like a series through the Sermon on the Mount that takes a few months, or through entire books at a time, which is the majority of what we do. And then we take certain seasons or individual sermons to go a little bit more topical, such as every year in December, we're preaching through Advent, which is more topical, but based on kind of the church calendar. And so we're trying to always do that. We want to get in a balance of both Old Testament and both New Testament, right? We don't want to be all in one or all in the other. And so for Ecclesiastes in particular, less common book, right? It's not everybody's favorite read, but I love it.
I mean, it's not like you picked Leviticus,
right? Hey,
it's still not the first.
Maybe January of 2027, we're going
27,
Leviticus. Who knows? But Ecclesiastes is the book for our age. And what I mean by that is I cannot think of a book. I mean, obviously, like the Gospels in general are always relevant, but a book that specifically answers all the questions that our culture is really struggling with. I can't think of a better option than Ecclesiastes for that. Yeah. I remember hearing about this thought experiment a few years ago where it was like, okay, if you had the opportunity to essentially be the person that you are now in the current age, at the current like socioeconomic level that you're at, or to go be royalty, but you had to live 500 years ago, would you do that? And the question was meant to basically make you think like, do you want to be rich just knowing that you're better off than other people, but having fewer of the modern luxuries that you currently have? Or are you okay with knowing that a lot of other people are richer than you, but you as a whole are doing better than somebody 500 years ago? And it's such an interesting thought experiment because you think about it and you're like, I'm not giving up air conditioning.
Absolutely.
Right? Like I probably don't want to give up TV or like my fridge or, I don't have a Tempur-Pedic mattress, but if I did, I wouldn't give it up. And you think about that and it's like where we're at in human history, like we are better off than anyone ever. Even just like the average middle-class American is way better off than people in history. Obviously, I know things aren't perfect, but we're doing pretty okay compared to just the average state of a human being over time. And so it makes you ask this question, shouldn't we be happier?
One would think.
Like, shouldn't we be happier? We have gotten to this point where on average, we're richer than we've ever been. We've got more stuff than we've ever had. All these things that we used to say, well, I'll be happy once I get this thing.
Right.
And then the goalposts always move when we get there. And I think that what we'll see when we get to a couple passages into Ecclesiastes is there's this idea that there's nothing new under the sun, right? Like everything that we're going to see over and over and over again is that we aren't asking questions that people haven't been asking for thousands of years.
Yeah.
We might be asking them in a slightly different way, or like our context might be a tiny bit different. But in reality, like everyone's asking the same questions. The human condition hasn't really changed all that much. And so we've got this book in our Bibles, and it's fascinating and it's complex. And to be honest, it's a little bit moody, which makes it interesting to read. But I think that it's pressing into the exact ache that the average person is feeling in our day and age. And so I think I'm really excited for us to get into it and just see how relevant it is for today and see what God has to say to us in that.
Yeah, I mean, I think you've hit it on the nail on the head. The culture is asking so many questions.
Right.
And there are so many things that you read in Ecclesiastes and you're like, oh
yeah,
that's
like
exactly how I feel about that particular thing.
Right.
I mean, it might not be the exact thing, but you can relate it so easily to something that you're going through.
Absolutely. You're facing all these questions of, why am I not actually happy? What is the meaning of life? How do I actually wrestle with death? And we're in a culture that we do everything in our power to avoid thinking about death.
Yeah.
Right? Death happens in hospitals, which is this cold and sterile environment that's not personal to me.
Right.
Whereas for most of human history, it's like you're dying in your home bed.
Yeah.
And so we outsource death completely away from us and then avoid thinking about it at all costs.
Well, I think as a culture as a whole, we try to avoid anything that causes any kind of pain.
Absolutely.
I mean, we don't want physical pain. We don't want emotional pain.
Right.
Financial pain. I mean, pain is like life is only good when there's absence of pain.
Right.
And so I think I'm excited about going through this book.
Yeah, and that's such an interesting point about the pain, because it's not that pain is actually inherently good and we're supposed to trick ourselves into believing that, but it's that we have to be realistic about what life actually is and the state that the world's in. And so when we try to kind of self-medicate ourselves through with whatever thing that we're relying on, whether it's our phones or something else, when we try to distract ourselves from reality, we end up missing everything because we're just ignoring it. And I think that's where Ecclesiastes is kind of grabbing our heads and forcing us to look in this certain direction and say, no, you need to look at this. Like, maybe I'm coming up with this example on the spot, so nobody should hold me to this. But this is crazy. When you have like a dog throw up on the floor. Actually, that's so funny because you were telling me about that
just tell you
the other day. That's why I'm thinking of that. Okay, you have the cat throw up on your carpet and you just want to hold their head to it to just be like, look at what you've done.
This is horrible.
This is your mess. I just need you to acknowledge that you did this.
Yes.
Ecclesiastes is kind of doing that to us, where it's like,
forcing
you need
our
to
face
look at
to it,
this.
isn't it?
Yeah.
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 Well, so I know in Scripture, I mean, you can't have a book the size of the Bible and not have different types of literature within the book. So we know that Ecclesiastes is what would be called wisdom literature.
Yeah.
Well, can you talk a little bit about that for somebody who might not be more familiar with that idea?
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe a helpful way to think about it is when you think about the Bible, it is one book, but at the same time, it's also a library of books.
Yeah.
And so in a library, you're going to have different genres. You're going to have narrative and poetry and everything else. And in the same way, the Bible is made up of books of different genres, and even some books have multiple genres in them. But you think about like narrative. So we have narrative literature in the Bible. You think about the Gospels, where we're seeing all these stories of Jesus and his life and his death and his resurrection. And so that's all in the context of narrative, same as like all the stories in the Old Testament about figures like Abraham and Moses and David. Then we also have like poetry. So you think about the Psalms, and they're so relatable to people because it just feels like a song that you would sing, or poetry that expresses your emotions. And we have letters that, just like letters now, I mean, they have their own distinct characteristics, but in the same way that I'm addressing a certain person or group of people, we have these letters in the New Testament where like Paul often or other figures are writing a letter to somebody or an entire church to instruct them on how the gospel is relevant to some particular situation. So we've got all these different genres. And each genre is essentially used, it's like a tool in the author's tool belt for a way that they can communicate the message that they're trying to communicate. So for instance, one of the reasons, like when I teach on how to read the Bible, an example I give for like why poetry is so important is like I love Billy Joel. And Billy Joel, like most famous song, right? Piano Man. And he has this great line about loneliness and this feeling of loneliness that you hear in Piano Man. And if I'm an author and I'm trying to communicate this feeling of loneliness, I can write about it in where I'm like, here's this study on loneliness and all these statistics and facts and from a very like medical perspective. But if you put that up against Piano Man, which one makes you get the feeling of loneliness more? And it's the poetry. And so authors use genres to communicate whatever they're trying to communicate in these unique ways. And so for wisdom literature, which we're talking about Old Testament books like Proverbs, Job, Song of Songs, and then Ecclesiastes, wisdom literature is a genre where basically the author's primary goal is to develop character in the person reading it. So
okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, and so it exists kind of in this strand and storyline of the entire Old Testament. So everything that's happening in the Bible is kind of the foundation for these wisdom writers. And then they're coming in and writing, and basically in writing, they're trying to develop the character of the readers. So you think about Proverbs, which is an all-time favorite book of the Bible. And part of the reason is because so much of it is just so practical.
Yeah.
Like it just says straight up, don't be lazy because being lazy is not good for you. And you can read that and be like, oh, great.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Like I need to not be lazy. That makes sense. And so big picture, if the goal is to develop character, or we could say to make us more like Jesus, then that's what we're seeing is happening in wisdom literature. For instance, to use that same example of laziness, Jesus is not lazy, right? And so if the wisdom literature is saying that laziness is a poor way to live, then it's saying the reason why is because we want to ultimately become more like Jesus, because developing character means developing character in a godly way, right?
Yeah.
The way that God intended. And not to get like too in the weeds, but maybe this would be a helpful way to think through it too. With those 4 wisdom literature books, one of the approaches that I found really helpful from a couple of Bible scholars is to think about it like Proverbs is kind of the centerpiece to wisdom literature. Like you read Proverbs and it's like, yeah, this is saying what the rational, ordered, normal standard of life is like. Like this is what life
This
is.
how to lead a good life.
Exactly. 99 times out of 100, right? This is broadly speaking, this is what life looks like. If you're lazy, you're probably not going to succeed in whatever thing. Always there's exceptions, but in general, it's presenting this rational, ordered approach to life. And then those other 3 books, Job, Song of Songs, and here Ecclesiastes, they kind of present the exceptions to the rule that Proverbs sets up. So with Ecclesiastes specifically, we're going to see how that rational and ordered approach to life in Proverbs doesn't solve the meaning of life question.
Right.
Right? You can not be lazy and be successful, but so what?
Yeah, you can have all the money in the world and still not be happy.
Exactly.
Right.
And so if the rational and ordered approach to life gets you to be successful and have money, but then at the end of the day, you die just the same as the lazy person who was unsuccessful.
So what's the point?
What is the point? What does that accomplish?
Yeah.
And so by Ecclesiastes kind of raising that exception, we're going to be able to explore those kind of big questions that are super important for us, all in the realm of seeking to develop character, seeking to develop us as a kind of people who live a certain kind of life in response to the things that we've seen in the text.
Well, so heading into Ecclesiastes with that in mind, knowing that it's a wisdom literature book, is there kind of a mindset or anything that we should think about or a way we should think as we approach Ecclesiastes?
Yeah, that's a good question. I read a really helpful book recently from a pastor named Bobby Jamieson, and he wrote this book on Ecclesiastes called Everything is Never Enough, which is a great title.
Oh, yeah.
And he, in his introduction, kind of gives these 5 metaphors for what is happening in Ecclesiastes. And I think these 5 metaphors, if you remember them going into the sermons, will be kind of a helpful way to frame what's happening in the text. So just to kind of rattle them off. Number 1, Ecclesiastes is a quest, right? It's a search for what the meaning of life is, for answers to these big questions. And so you can imagine reading it like the following somebody going on a quest. But it's not only a quest, but number 2, it's also a question. So you're going to see, and in that kind of really annoying way where sometimes more questions get raised than answers given.
Yeah.
But I heard this phrase that's like, a really well-framed question is better than a bad answer. And that made me think, because it's like, yeah, absolutely. Like the question that really makes you think and is a good and probing question sometimes does a lot for you, more than just like a trite and superficial answer.
Right.
And so we're going to see Ecclesiastes as a question, raising a lot of questions. The third image is the preacher, this character that we see in the story. The preacher is a stand-up comic.
I think that's probably surprising to a lot of people.
Yeah,
to hear.
yeah. They're like, what do you mean there's a
What?
stand-up comic in the Bible? Here's what that image means. So you have these kinds of stand-up comics who do like an observational style of comedy. And what that means is the whole joke is just that they're pointing out really everyday
Realities.
stuff.
Oh, yeah.
And then everyone laughs about it because it's something that everyone's kind of thinking about, but no one's quite put their finger on. And so it's hyperbolic. The thing gets caricatured, of course, right? It's not the perfect picture of reality when it's in that stand-up comic form. But what we're going to see is that
It makes the point.
right, it makes the point. And so the preacher all throughout Ecclesiastes is going to be pointing out truth in that kind of extreme and hyperbolic way. Not exactly the same, but similar to how a stand-up comic would do that. And then almost the opposite view would be the fourth thing, which is the preacher is kind of like the philosopher at a party. And so you can have that image in your head of the guy who's like standing in the corner and everybody's having a good time doing whatever, but he's just kind of brooding by the wall, and he's standing there and he's thinking like, don't you guys know we're all going to die one day?
You guys are so clueless.
Exactly. So you have this image of the preacher as the guy who's trying to rouse all these distracted people to pay attention to this reality that he sees as inevitable, that he sees as clearly coming to affect all of us, but everyone's distracted. Nobody's paying attention to this. And so he's the guy at the party who's trying to draw everybody's attention to it, even though that makes him seem like a downer to all the people who are like, hey, man, like,
who invited him?
Yeah, who invited this guy? I'm just here to have a good time. Why are we talking about death?
Seriously? Yeah.
So we've got the preacher as a philosopher at a party. And then the final thing is that he's also kind of like a photographer, with the image being that he's going around and he's taking all these pictures of things in life, and then he's assembling them into this big collage. But he's doing so in this really unique and creative way. And so when we look at the picture as a whole, sometimes it's a little difficult to see how he got from the small picture to the big. You're like, okay, what's the purpose of his order here? What exactly is he doing with this? And that's part of the reason why the book can be a little bit of a difficult read, just to kind of set you up for that.
Yeah.
But overall, I think those images of the quest, the question, the stand-up comic, the party philosopher, and the photographer might be a helpful way for you to go in and kind of have this thought of what Ecclesiastes even is and what's happening as you're reading and listening to these sermons.
Well, that's helpful. I think if you can kind of get that point of view.
Yeah.
To know, oh, okay, this is an area where this is how he's thinking through
Right.
a certain situation.
Right.
That's really interesting. I hadn't thought about Ecclesiastes in those like 5 metaphors. I think that'll be super helpful.
Yeah, I'm thankful for that Bobby Jamieson book. It's a bit of a weird book because he's going like full philosopher on you, but it was a really helpful read for just how to think through Ecclesiastes as a whole.
That's neat. So I'm sure that you have prayers for West Park and thoughts of what you would like to see through this series. So what would you say would be on your heart as one of the teaching pastors here?
Yeah, I think I'm going to borrow from those wisdom literature writers when I say that, like, I want to see our church have that character developed into the image of Christ as a result of what we see here. So I think, like, if Ecclesiastes is providing satisfying answers to these really big life questions about what's the meaning of life, why do people die, what do we do with suffering, all these big questions, I want us to be a church of people who are thinking rightly about life and death in the midst of a culture that is either not thinking about it at all or not thinking about it well.
Yeah.
And I think that is where we become a people who genuinely embody the gospel message in a very compelling way to a watching world that really wants answers to these questions.
Well, as you were saying that, I thought that is the thing that will make us stand out to the world.
Right.
You know, they will see basically the peace of Christ reigning in our lives.
Right.
And what makes us so different? How did we get there?
Right. And it's not that there's not a place for these kind of rational arguments to back up Christianity. I absolutely think there's a place for that. But I think sometimes we put that on the front end as like the number one thing. That's step one, is that I need to go out and like maybe argue somebody into Christianity. When in reality, I think that is a better place for the person who is intrigued and open to that idea, and they have questions that they genuinely want answers to. But for the person who's just, you know, the average person walking by who just interacts with somebody who's a Christian, that first step isn't probably that they need to be argued into the faith, but that they live in the same world that we do, and they're not happy, even though they should be, right?
Should be.
They according to all this stuff.
Right. The cultural they check all the boxes culturally why they should be happy.
Right. And so we're living in the same world, and so they go, how is it that you actually are happy, or you seem happy? What is the reason behind that? And then having that compelling answer, I think, is something I'm really excited to see happen in the life of the church. I mean, I think that we live out our theology. Like the phrase I always use is that theology has feet.
Yeah.
It's not just living up in some ivory tower somewhere where Christians are debating 10-syllable words back and forth, but everything that we actually practice and live out flows from an underlying belief and certain beliefs about God and the world and our relationship to both God and the world.
Yeah.
And I think a book like Ecclesiastes that addresses those questions so head on puts us in a spot to be able to have a really robust theology that then causes us to go out into the world with an actual clear message and hope in Christ. So that's really my prayer for this series.
Yeah. I see it as being very visibly transformative in our lives, I think, to the world. So I'm excited.
You and me both.
Well, we'll see what happens over the next 11 weeks.
Yes, we'll see what happens.
Check out those study guides every week and work through after the messages a little more.
Absolutely.
But yeah, we're excited to see what God shows us through this book. Thanks for coming and sitting down and talking with me about it.
Always a pleasure.
It's been great. We'll talk again soon, I'm sure.
Yep.
Thank you for listening to Impact the World. To find out more about West Park Baptist Church in Knoxville, Tennessee, visit westparkbaptist.org.